Open your eyes and look at me. No, I don't think I will kiss you. Although you need kissing badly. That's what's wrong with you. You should be kissed and often, and by someone who knows how.
Picture this. Cary Grant walking into an elevator. Within seconds, everyone's gasping for air. Clark Gable leaning in for a kiss, making his co-star vomit backstage. John Wayne clearing an entire soundstage without saying a word. Hollywood's biggest stars had a secret the studios spent millions to hide. Not affairs, not scandals, something far worse. They smelled absolutely terrible. The list you're about to hear will forever change how you watch classic Hollywood films. You'll never look at Casablanca the same way again. Everyone knew Cary Grant as the most debonair man in Hollywood. Tall, dark, handsome, with that unmistakable transatlantic accent that made every woman weak at the knees. In North by Northwest, Bringing Up Baby, and The Philadelphia Story, he was the picture of refined elegance. The kind of man you'd trust with your life, your heart, your daughter. But on the Paramount lot in Burbank, California, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1958, something happened that would become whispered legend. The set of Houseboat was in full production. Sophia Loren, imported from Italy and at the height of her beauty, was preparing for a romantic scene with Grant. The soundstage was sealed tight, air conditioning struggling against the California heat and the blazing Klieg lights overhead. Temperature inside, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Grant emerged from his dressing room at 2:47 p.m. Makeup artist Frank Westmore, who'd worked with him for over a decade, was the first to notice. He later told Hedda Hopper in a 1962 interview, carefully worded to protect the star. Cary had discovered LSD therapy that year. His psychiatrist had him on experimental treatments. And whatever chemical cocktail was in his system, it was coming out through his pores. But that wasn't the whole story. Grant had developed an obsessive grooming routine that involved applying not one, not two, but 7 different colognes, aftershaves, and hair tonics every morning. Bay rum, vetiver, sandalwood, lavender water, Pinot Clubman, English leather, and a custom blend from a Beverly Hills apothecary that contained musk oil so concentrated it was normally used in perfume manufacturing. When mixed with the LSD metabolites sweating out of his skin under those hot lights, the result was catastrophic. Sophia Loren, in a 1999 interview with Italian television that was never dubbed into English, finally told the truth. The first time we embraced for the camera, I thought I would faint. Not from romance, from the smell. It was like being trapped inside a perfume factory that was on fire. My eyes watered. My throat closed. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but then I could taste it. The scene required 7 takes. By the 4th take, Sophia excused herself and vomited in her dressing room. By the 6th take, 3 crew members had developed headaches, so severe they had to leave the soundstage. Director Melville Shavelson finally called for a 2-hour break and had industrial fans brought in. Harry Stradling Sr., the cinematographer, wrote in his personal journal, "Never in 30 years behind a camera have I seen a leading lady turn green on film. We had to adjust the color balance because Sophia's complexion had actually changed from the chemical exposure. The studio nurse came to check on her between takes." But the real shock came when Grant returned from his dressing room after the break, having reapplied his entire 7 cologne routine. According to script supervisor Meta Carpenter, who witnessed the entire incident, Mr. Shavelson actually yelled at Cary Grant. "I'd never heard a director yell at Cary Grant." He said, "For God's sake, Cary, take a shower and use nothing but soap." But Cary was convinced his scent routine was essential to his image. He refused. The production had to be redesigned. Close-ups were shot separately. Romantic scenes were filmed with the actors standing farther apart than normal, relying on camera angles to create intimacy. One passionate kiss was achieved using a technique called split-screen photography, where Grant and Loren were never actually in the same room at the same time. The studio buried the story deep. Paramount's publicity department worked overtime to plant stories about the electric chemistry between the stars. But among Hollywood insiders, Houseboat became known as the perfume incident. Grant continued his 7 cologne routine for the rest of his career. Leading ladies learned to request outdoor scenes preferred in their contracts when working with him. And at least 3 actresses turned down roles opposite him, citing scheduling conflicts that everyone in the industry understood meant something else entirely. If you thought Grant's chemical warfare was shocking, wait until you hear about the star whose natural scent was so overpowering that it changed how Hollywood handled costume design forever. Clark Gable was called the King of Hollywood for good reason. With that trademark mustache, those commanding eyes, and that voice that rumbled like distant thunder, he ruled the silver screen from 1930 to 1960. Gone with the Wind, it happened one night. Mutiny on the Bounty, the man defined what it meant to be a leading man. But behind the crown lay a secret so disturbing that MGM spent over $2 million in today's money to keep it out of the press. February 14th, 1939. The Gone with the Wind, set in Culver City, California. The production was already behind schedule and over budget. David O. Selznick was desperate to capture the iconic scene where Rhett Butler sweeps Scarlett O'Hara into his arms and carries her up the grand staircase. Vivien Leigh arrived on set at 6 a.m., already in full costume and makeup. She'd been preparing for this moment for months. The scene would define her career. Gable arrived at 8:30 a.m., 2.5 hours late. William Cameron Menzies, the production designer who was on set that day, recorded in his notes, "The moment Clark walked onto the soundstage, I saw Vivien's face change. She went pale, actually pale, and she was already wearing pale makeup for the scene." The truth was this: Clark Gable had lost most of his teeth to gum disease by age 32. He wore full dentures, something the studio guarded more carefully than classified military secrets. But the dentures weren't the problem. The problem was that Gable almost never cleaned them properly. Costume designer Walter Plunkett later told film historian Rudy Behlmer, Clark would leave his dentures in a glass by his bed, sometimes for days at a time. He'd put them back in his mouth in the morning without proper cleaning. The bacteria, the buildup, the decay, it created a smell that could stop a charging bull. Combined with Gable's habits, he smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, drank whiskey before lunch, and had a fondness for raw onions. The result was breath so toxic that it became a genuine health hazard. Vivien Leigh, in a letter to her husband Laurence Olivier, wrote, "Darling, I must tell you about today, though it pains me to recall. The scene with Clark carrying me up the stairs required our faces to be very close. When he spoke his lines, I felt my stomach turn. It was like being breathed on by something dead and rotting. I had to turn my head away between takes and breathe into a handkerchief soaked in lavender water. But that was just the beginning of that terrible Valentine's Day. The scene required 14 takes. By the 8th take, Vivien had developed a splitting headache. By the 10th, she excused herself to vomit in her dressing room. The studio nurse, Margaret Donovan, was called to the set with smelling salts. Olivia de Havilland, who played Melanie and was waiting in the wings for her scene, witnessed everything. In a 2008 interview with Vanity Fair, she finally broke her silence. We all knew about Clark's problem. Everyone on the MGM lot knew. But you couldn't say anything. He was the king. The studio protected him absolutely. Any actress who complained was labeled difficult and found herself blacklisted. The real shock came when assistant director Eric Stacy pulled Selznick aside and suggested a solution. They could shoot the scene with doubles and use close-ups separately. Selznick refused, saying the chemistry had to be real. So they made Vivien Leigh suffer through 6 more takes. By the end of the day, she consumed an entire bottle of gin in her dressing room just to calm her nerves. The studio doctor prescribed her sleeping pills. She didn't sleep for 3 days anyway, haunted by what one crew member called the smell of death wearing a mustache. The production notes show that for the rest of filming, whenever a scene required Gable to be in close proximity to his co-stars, the set would be flooded with industrial fans. Selznick ordered props to scatter fresh flowers everywhere, supposedly for authenticity, but really to mask the smell. MGM's head of publicity, Howard Strickling, went into overdrive. He planted stories about Gable's masculine appeal, his virile presence, his commanding physicality. What they meant was, he smells terrible, but we're going to convince America it's attractive. And it worked. For decades, Gable's denture problem and the accompanying odor remained one of Hollywood's most closely guarded secrets. Actresses who worked with him developed a coded language. Clark requires distance work meant, I can't breathe when he's near me. The tragedy is that the problem was completely fixable. A proper dental hygiene routine, regular cleaning, maybe a visit to a periodontist. But Gable was stubborn, vain about his condition, and protected by a studio system that valued his box office draw over the health and comfort of everyone around him. But if the king's breath was a nightmare, it was nothing compared to what Jean Harlow was carrying in her clothes. Jean Harlow invented the platinum blonde bombshell. In Hell's Angels, Dinner at 8, and Bombshell, she radiated sexuality, sophistication, and that distinctive white-hot glamour that made her one of the biggest stars of the 1930s. But there was something the cameras couldn't capture, and the studio worked overtime to hide. June 3rd, 1936. MGM Studios, Stage 15. The production of Libeled Lady was in its fourth week. William Powell, Myrna Loy, and Spencer Tracy were all on set for a pivotal dinner scene. The soundstage was packed, 40 extras, full camera crew, orchestra for live recording. At 11:17 a.m., Jean Harlow entered the set. What happened next was documented in Assistant Director Joseph Newman's daily report, later discovered by film historian E.J. Fleming. Miss Harlow arrived in yesterday's costume. Upon inquiry, wardrobe mistress confirmed actress had requested to keep wearing same outfit to maintain continuity. Within 5 minutes of her arrival, noticed several extras moving away from her position. Within 10 minutes, Miss Loy requested fans be turned on despite dialogue recording requirements. The truth was this: Jean Harlow had developed a peculiar phobia about changing clothes. According to her personal maid, Blanche Williams, in a 1965 interview with Modern Screen magazine, Miss Harlow believed that changing clothes too often was bad luck. She'd wear the same dress, the same undergarments, for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days straight. In the California heat, under those studio lights, you can imagine what that meant. But it wasn't just superstition. Harlow had been bleaching her hair platinum blonde using a mixture of peroxide, ammonia, and household bleach since 1930. The chemical process had damaged her scalp so severely that she had open sores, weeping lesions, and chronic infections. Her doctors had advised her to stop, but she refused. The platinum hair was her trademark. The chemicals, the infected scalp, the unwashed hair, the days-old clothes soaked in sweat and studio makeup, it created an aroma that makeup artist William Tuttle later described as suffocating. On that June day in 1936, the disaster unfolded slowly. First, 2 extras complained of headaches. They were sent home. Then Myrna Loy, mid-scene, suddenly stopped, pressed a handkerchief to her nose, and walked off set without explanation. Director Jack Conway called a 20-minute break. William Powell, who was romantically involved with Harlow at the time, tried to speak with her privately. According to Powell's friend and confidant, director Woody Van Dyke, Bill loved Jean deeply, but even he couldn't stand being in a closed room with her. He tried to suggest she bathe more often, change clothes more frequently, see a doctor about her scalp. She took it as a personal attack and wouldn't speak to him for 3 days. The breaking point came when Spencer Tracy, known for his blunt honesty, approached Conway and said loudly enough for several people to hear, "Either she cleans up or I'm walking. I can't work like this. None of us can." Conway shut down production for the rest of the day. MGM's studio chief, Louis B. Mayer, was called to the set. He met with Harlow privately in her dressing room. What was said in that meeting remains unknown, but when Harlow emerged 2 hours later, her eyes were red from crying. The next day, she arrived in fresh clothes. The day after that, she'd clearly washed her hair. The scalp infections, however, continued to worsen. Less than a year later, on June 7th, 1937, Jean Harlow died of kidney failure at age 26. Her death certificate listed uremic poisoning as the cause, but several medical historians have since suggested that the chemical burns on her scalp, the chronic infections, and the toxins her body was absorbing through her damaged skin may have contributed to her kidney problems. In the months before her death, crew members noticed the smell had changed. It wasn't just sweat and old clothes anymore. Makeup artist Violet Jones told her daughter years later, it was a sweet, sickly smell, like flowers rotting, like something dying from the inside. William Powell was with her when she died. He never married again. When asked why, he would only say, "I had my chance at happiness and I watched it slip away." Some think he meant he should have insisted she get better medical care. Others believe he was simply heartbroken. Either way, the platinum goddess who defined an era died smelling of chemicals, infection, and regret. But if Harlow's tragedy was rooted in vanity and fear, the next star on our list made choices that were far more deliberate and far more disturbing to everyone around him. Errol Flynn swung across the screen like no one before or since. Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, the Sea Hawk, he was adventure incarnate, the hero every boy wanted to be and every girl wanted to kiss. But on Warner Brothers soundstages, there was a saying, "Downwind from Flynn is where careers go to die." July 19th, 1938. The set of The Adventures of Robin Hood was filming the iconic archery tournament scene. Olivia de Havilland, in her role as Maid Marian, was dressed in yards of heavy medieval costume in the middle of a California summer. Flynn arrived at 9 a.m., 3 hours late. The reason for his lateness was well known to everyone on the lot. He'd been at a party at his Mulholland Drive mansion until 6 a.m., a party that, according to his biographer Charles Hyam, involved bootleg rum, illegal substances, and what Flynn himself called Hollywood's most beautiful people of both sexes. Flynn walked on his set wearing the same costume from the previous day's shoot. It hadn't been cleaned. He hadn't bathed. His philosophy, repeated often to anyone who would listen: the smell of a man is the smell of adventure. Director Michael Curtiz, a Hungarian immigrant who didn't mince words, took one look at Flynn and exploded. According to script supervisor Meta Wild, Michael started yelling in Hungarian, then German, then broken English. The only part we understood clearly was, "You stink like pig, like dead pig in summer." Flynn just laughed and asked for his first drink of the day. It was 9:15 a.m. The scene required Flynn to help de Havilland down from a viewing stand. Close contact, smiling faces, romantic chemistry. The cameras rolled. De Havilland, in her 2016 memoir, My Life in 3 Acts, finally told the full story. "When Errol took my hand to help me down the steps, I made the mistake of inhaling. The smell hit me like a physical blow. It was layered, if you can imagine that. Old alcohol sweating out his pores, stale tobacco, something fungal and damp from unwashed clothes, and underneath it all, the unmistakable musk of activities I won't describe in detail. I yanked my hand away instinctively. Michael had to call cut, but Flynn was just getting started. The next scene required them to stand close together, speaking dialogue in hushed, romantic tones. Flynn leaned in, delivered his line, and de Havilland's eyes started to water. She later wrote, "His breath was its own ecosystem. I could smell every vice he'd indulged in the night before. Every drink, every cigarette, every moment of debauchery. And he clearly hadn't brushed his teeth." Take after take, de Havilland struggled. Finally, she requested a private word with Curtiz. When she emerged from his office, she was carrying a small bottle of Vicks Vapor Rub. Cinematographer Sol Polito watched as de Havilland discreetly applied the mentholated gel under her nose between takes. It was the only way she could get through the scenes, Polito told American cinematographer in 1952. The Vicks blocked Flynn's smell enough that she could function. Within a week, half the cast was doing the same thing. The Warner Brothers costume department started a new policy after Robin Hood. All of Flynn's costumes had to be cleaned nightly, whether he wanted them to be or not. They'd wait until he left the lot, then sneak into his dressing room and grab them. Head costumer Milo Anderson told The Hollywood Reporter in 1959, "We tried cleaning them with normal methods first. Didn't work. The smell had permeated the fabric so deeply we had to soak them in industrial degreaser, then vinegar, then hang them outside overnight. Sometimes we just had to make new costumes and destroy the old ones. But the most disturbing incident came during the filming of The Sea Hawk in 1940. A crowd scene required Flynn to sword fight his way through dozens of extras. The soundstage was sealed for sound recording. No windows, no ventilation, just hot lights and 60 people packed together. Flynn had been partying for 3 consecutive nights. He showed up in the same shirt he'd worn the entire time, soaked through with sweat, alcohol, and everything else. 10 minutes into filming, an extra collapsed. The studio nurse, believing it was heat exhaustion, helped him outside. 5 minutes later, 2 more extras asked to be excused, both looking green. Flynn kept fighting, kept sweating, kept radiating what one crew member called the smell of sin. By the end of the day, 7 people had left the set early claiming illness. The studio doctor filed a complaint with Jack Warner himself, stating that working in close quarters with Mr. Flynn without proper hygiene protocols constitutes a health hazard. Warner's response was swift. He sent Flynn a case of expensive French soap and a note that read, "Use this or you're fired." Not kidding. Jack, Flynn used the soap. Once, then he went back to his old ways. For the rest of his career, Flynn's body odor was a fact of life on Warner Brothers sets. Actresses requested outdoor scenes. Directors scheduled intimate scenes for early morning before Flynn could work up a sweat. And crew members developed a rotation system, so no one had to work close to him for more than an hour at a time. When Errol Flynn died in 1959 at age 50, his autopsy revealed a body ravaged by decades of excess. But those who had worked with him remembered something else. The way he'd laugh when people winced at his smell, as if their discomfort proved he was living more fully than they dared. One final note from Olivia de Havilland's memoir. For all his faults, and they were legion, Errol had a quality that made you forgive him almost anything. Almost. But 30 years later, I can still remember exactly what he smelled like. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. But if Flynn's smell was the aroma of deliberate excess, the next star's scent told a different story. One of slow decay hidden behind perfect makeup and designer gowns. Bette Davis had those eyes. All about Eve, Jezebel, now Voyager. She was intensity personified, the actress who could strip you bare with a glance and destroy you with a perfectly delivered line. But there was something about Bette Davis that the cameras never captured, something that made even the toughest crew members in Hollywood think twice before working with her. September 8th, 1950. The set of All About Eve at 20th Century Fox. What should have been the crowning achievement of Davis's career became something else entirely. A masterclass in how to clear a room without saying a word. Davis was 42 years old, at the absolute peak of her powers. She'd just come off a string of hits and was finally getting the respect she deserved. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz had written the role of Margot Channing specifically for her. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. Costume designer Edith Head had been working in Hollywood for 25 years. She dressed everyone from Paramount to Fox. She later told designer Nolan Miller, "I'd never encountered anything like it." They would arrive at fittings wearing the same clothes she'd worn for days. The smell would hit you before she came through the door. Old cigarettes, yes, but also something medicinal, something wrong. Davis was a chain smoker. 4 packs of Chesterfields a day, every day, for decades. But it wasn't just tobacco. She developed a habit of smoking in bed, falling asleep with cigarettes burning, and waking up in the same clothes she'd slept in. The clothes would absorb the smoke, the ash, the burnt smell of fabric and hair singed by stray embers. Combined with her refusal to bathe daily, she believed it dried out her skin. The result was overpowering. And Baxter, who played Eve in the film, wrote in her 1976 autobiography, Intermission, "Our first scene together, Bette embraced me. It was supposed to be warm, maternal. But when she wrapped her arms around me, I had to fight every instinct to pull away. The smell was like opening a trunk that had been locked in an attic for years, full of old clothes and mothballs and something rotting underneath. But that was just the beginning. Davis had developed a medical condition, though she refused to acknowledge it or seek treatment. Multiple crew members noticed that she sweated profusely, even in cool rooms. Her clothing would be drenched under the arms, down her back, across her chest. Makeup artist Gene Hibbs tried to address it delicately. He suggested she might want to use a stronger deodorant, perhaps visit a doctor about excessive sweating. Davis's response, according to Hibbs in a 1985 interview, she looked at me with those eyes and said, "I am Bette Davis. I don't need to smell like a powder puff to be a star." Then she walked away, and I could smell her for 10 minutes afterward. The famous "Fasten Your Seatbelts" scene was filmed on September 15, 1950. The party sequence required Davis to be in close quarters with the entire cast. The soundstage was packed. Gary Merrill, who played Bill Sampson and would later become Davis's fourth husband, was standing next to her during rehearsal. According to assistant director Joseph Bem's notes, Mr. Merrill turned to me between takes and asked if we could have the air conditioning turned up. I informed him it was already at maximum. He looked at Miss Davis, then back at me, and said, "Then God help us all." 20 minutes into filming the party scene, extras started requesting bathroom breaks with unusual frequency. Director Mankiewicz called for the doors to be opened despite the noise it would create. Sound recordists had to compensate. Celeste Holm, who played Karen Richards, finally addressed it directly. In a 1997 interview with Turner Classic Movies, she revealed, "Between takes, I pulled Bette aside and asked her very gently if she was feeling well. She got defensive immediately. 'Why?' she demanded. I said, 'You seem to be perspiring heavily. I'm worried about you.' She told me to mind my own business, but I could see in her eyes that she knew. She knew what I was really saying." The smell got worse as the day went on. Under the hot lights, Davis's sweat-soaked costume began to literally steam. The cigarette smell intensified. The medicinal odor grew stronger. By 4 p.m., Hugh Marlowe, who played Lloyd Richards, excused himself and vomited in his dressing room. He told the assistant director it was food poisoning. Everyone knew better. Mankiewicz made a decision that day that changed how the film was shot. He started scheduling Davis's close-ups separately from the other actors. Wide shots would be filmed with everyone together, but intimate scenes were done with Davis alone, then the other actors separately, then edited together. The studio's official explanation: artistic choice. The real reason: no one could stand to be close to her for extended periods. But here's where the story gets complicated and darker. Davis wasn't ignorant or stubborn. She was sick. Years later, in 1983, Davis was diagnosed with breast cancer. During treatment, her doctors discovered she'd had an untreated thyroid disorder for decades. Hyperthyroidism causes excessive sweating, changes in body odor, and a host of other symptoms Davis had been experiencing since the 1940s. She never knew, or if she suspected, she never sought treatment because she was terrified any medical issue would be used against her in Hollywood's brutal system. So she suffered, and everyone around her suffered. The tragedy is that All About Eve remains one of the greatest films ever made. Davis's performance is luminous, heartbreaking, perfect. When you watch Margot Channing fall apart on screen, you're watching a woman who is falling apart in real life, undiagnosed and untreated. After the film wrapped, and Baxter sent Davis a gift basket. Inside was an expensive French perfume, luxury soap, and a note that read, "For the greatest actress I've ever worked with." The message was clear enough. Davis sent back a thank you card. She never used the gifts, but she kept the card on her dressing room mirror for the rest of her career. When Bette Davis died in 1989, her obituaries celebrated her talent, her strength, her legendary status. No one mentioned that she'd spent decades suffering from an undiagnosed illness that made her life miserable and made working with her an ordeal. But the crew members who were there, they remembered. They remembered having to open all the doors and windows. They remembered making excuses to leave the set. They remembered the smell that no amount of movie magic could erase. If Bette Davis's smell was tragedy masked as stubbornness, then the next star's aroma was pure, calculated rebellion, and almost destroyed his career before it began. James Dean lived fast, died young, and left a scented trail that made directors wonder if he was worth the trouble. East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, Giant, 3 films, 3 legendary performances, and a career that lasted only 18 months before that fatal car crash in 1955. But in those 18 months, Dean revolutionized acting and disgusted nearly everyone who had to work in close proximity to him. March 1955, the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank. Rebel Without a Cause was in production, and director Nicholas Ray was already regretting his casting choice. The problem wasn't Dean's talent. The kid was brilliant, transformative, exactly what Ray needed. The problem was that James Dean had weaponized his body odor. According to assistant director Don Page, who spoke to People magazine in 1975, Jimmy had this philosophy that he was a method actor, right? He believed that to play a troubled, angry teenager, he had to live like one. That meant no bathing, wearing the same clothes for days, sleeping in his car sometimes. He wanted to smell like rebellion, he said. We told him he just smelled like a homeless person. But Dean's smell was worse than simple, unwashed teenager. He developed a specific routine designed to make people uncomfortable. He'd wear the same white t-shirt for 5, 6, 7 days straight. He'd sleep in it, smoke in it, sweat in it, wear it to bars and parties, never wash it. The shirt would start white and end up gray-yellow, saturated with oil, smoke, and grime. Then came the leather jacket. Dean's iconic red jacket from Rebel was supposed to be a costume piece. He claimed it as his own and wore it everywhere, day and night, for weeks on end. Leather doesn't breathe. It traps every smell, every secretion, every molecule of smoke and sweat. Costume designer Moss Mabry told American Film in 1980, that jacket became a biohazard. I tried to take it from him to clean it, and he physically grabbed it back. He said, it has to have history. I said, it has bacteria. He laughed in my face. The first major incident happened during the famous switchblade scene with Corey Allen. The scene required Dean and Allen to be face to face, circling each other, breathing hard, full of tension. The cameras were tight, capturing every detail. The moment was supposed to be electric. Corey Allen, in a 1998 interview with Entertainment Weekly, revealed what really happened. We started the scene, and I'm looking into Jimmy's eyes, trying to channel all this aggression, and then I smell him. Really smell him. It was like standing next to a dumpster behind a seafood restaurant in August. My eyes literally watered, and the camera caught it. Nick Ray thought I was crying from the emotional intensity. I was crying because I wanted to throw up. But Dean knew exactly what he was doing. Between takes, he'd smoke Chesterfields and drink warm milk straight from a bottle, a combination that created a smell one prop master described as horrifyingly sour. Then he'd step close to his co-stars, invading their space, daring them to react. Natalie Wood, who was only 16 at the time, tried to be professional. But after the famous planetarium scene, where Dean was supposed to cradle her in his arms, she went directly to her dressing room and stayed there for an hour. Her mother, Maria Gurdon, complained to Nicholas Ray. According to Ray's biographer Bernard Eisenschitz, the director confronted Dean. You're making Natalie physically ill. Either you clean up or I recast. Dean's response, she's supposed to be vulnerable and uncomfortable. I'm helping her performance. Ray nearly fired him on the spot. The situation escalated during the mansion scene, where the 3 leads, Dean, Wood, and Sal Mineo, were supposed to play house in an abandoned building. The scene required them to be in close quarters for hours. Sal Mineo, before his death in 1976, told columnist Army Arkerd, that day was the worst. The abandoned mansion was already dusty and smelly, and then Jimmy shows up wearing clothes he'd clearly slept in. We're trying to do this delicate, emotional scene about lost kids finding family, and all I can think about is getting to fresh air. The final straw came when Dean showed up to the famous "You're tearing me apart" scene, having clearly not bathed in at least 4 days. Jim Backus, who played Dean's father and had been a professional actor for 20 years, later told Johnny Carson, I'd worked with everyone. Bogart, Gable, you name it. But I'd never had to physically resist gagging during a scene until that day. Jimmy was in my face, screaming, crying, and I'm trying to be present as an actor while simultaneously holding my breath. The crew developed strategies. Craft services started leaving extra strong coffee on set. hoping the coffee smell would overpower Dean's. Cigarettes were encouraged because smoke at least masked other odors. One camera operator wore a surgical mask and claimed he had cold. But here's the thing that makes this story different from the others. Dean was doing it on purpose. According to his friend and confidant, actor Dennis Stock, Jimmy told me he knew people were uncomfortable. That was the point. He wanted to make them feel off balance, vulnerable, real. He said, comfortable actors give comfortable performances, and I don't want anything comfortable. It was manipulation. Calculated. Cruel even, but it worked. Watch Rebel Without a Cause, and you can see it in every frame. The discomfort is real. The tension is real. When Natalie Wood looks at Dean with a mixture of attraction and revulsion, that's not just acting. Warner Brothers executives were furious. Jack Warner himself sent Dean a memo that read, "You will bathe daily and wear clean clothes, or you will be in breach of contract." Dean ignored it. He knew he was too valuable to fire. He knew the footage was too good to waste. On September 30th, 1955, less than 3 weeks after Giant wrapped, James Dean died in a car crash. He was 24 years old. At his funeral, several of his co-stars were quoted saying he looked more peaceful in death than he ever had in life. Elizabeth Taylor, who'd worked with him on Giant and endured weeks of his deliberate offensiveness, said something strange at the memorial service. According to Earl Holliman, who was there, Liz said, "He smells like flowers now." Finally, everyone thought she was talking poetically about death. Only those of us who'd worked with Jimmy knew what she really meant. James Dean's legacy is complicated. Brilliant actor? Absolutely. Revolutionary? Without question. But also someone who weaponized basic hygiene as a psychological tool, making everyone around him suffer for his art. The question remains, does the performance justify the cruelty? Does genius excuse making people physically ill? If James Dean turned his smell into a weapon, our next star turned hers into a medical mystery that baffled doctors and terrorized co-stars for decades. Marlene Dietrich was sophistication itself. That voice, those legs, that continental mystique, she was everything Hollywood wanted Europeans to be. Shanghai Express, Destry Rides Again, witness for the prosecution. She was untouchable, unknowable, perfect, until you got within 3 feet of her. December 1958. The set of Touch of Evil in Venice, California. Orson Welles was directing, and he'd managed to convince Dietrich to make a cameo appearance. It should have been a triumphant reunion of 2 legends. It became a chemical weapons incident. The problem began in 1929 when Dietrich first came to Hollywood from Germany. She was determined to maintain her European sophistication, to stand apart from the scrubbed, wholesome American stars. So she adopted a European hygiene routine. According to her daughter, Maria Riva, in her tell-all memoir, Marlene Dietrich, my mother believed Americans were obsessed with bathing, which she found vulgar. She bathed twice a week, maybe 3 times if she felt particularly dirty. The rest of the time, she relied on perfume, but not just any perfume. Dietrich used a custom blend made for her by a Parisian perfumer, heavy gardenia, musk, and civet, an ingredient derived from the anal glands of civet cats. She didn't dab it on. She doused herself in it. Every morning, every evening, layer upon layer upon layer. The result was overpowering. Makeup artist Dottie Pondel, who worked with Dietrich for years, told Modern Screen in 1963, Marlene's dressing room smelled like someone had bombed a French whorehouse. The scent would seep out into the hallway, into the soundstage, into your hair and clothes. You'd go home smelling like Marlene. But the perfume was just camouflage for something worse. Dietrich had developed a condition called bromidrosis, a medical condition where sweat produces an unusually strong, unpleasant odor. Combined with her refusal to bathe daily and her habit of wearing foundation garments that couldn't be washed, the situation was dire. On the Touch of Evil set, Orson Welles made a decision that shocked everyone. He shot Dietrich's entire scene in extreme close-up with no other actors in the frame. His cinematographer, Russell Meddy, explained in a 1979 interview, Orson told me, shoot her face. Only her face. Don't pull back. Don't show anyone else. I asked why. He just looked at me and said, Trust me, you don't want to know. The truth came out later that day. Charlton Heston, who had a brief scene with Dietrich, arrived on set and was briefed by Wells. According to Heston's diary, published in 1995, Orson pulled me aside and said, "Chuck, I need you to stand exactly here, no closer. When Marlene speaks to you, breathe through your mouth, not your nose. Don't ask questions, just do it." I thought he was joking. He wasn't joking. When Dietrich entered the set, Heston understood immediately. "The smell hit me from 10 feet away," he wrote. "It was like walking into a wall of old flowers, cat urine, and something sweet and rotten. I've been in combat. I've smelled death. This was worse because it was coming from a living person." The scene required one take. Wells called cut and immediately dismissed Dietrich, thanking her profusely for her time. She swept out, leaving a scented cloud that lingered for an hour. But Touch of Evil was nothing compared to what happened during her stage shows. In the 1960s and 70s, Dietrich toured the world performing cabaret shows. She'd wear elaborate gowns encrusted with beads and sequins, custom-made to mold to her body. She'd sweat through these gowns during performances, but she refused to have them cleaned, believing it would damage the delicate work. A wardrobe assistant in London told The Guardian in 2001, "Miss Dietrich wore the same performance gown for weeks at a time. The sweat would crystallize on the beads. You could see salt stains. The smell was indescribable, like an expensive perfume left in the sun for a year." Orchestra musicians requested to be placed as far from the stage as possible. Front row audience members learned to bring handkerchiefs soaked in cologne. One reviewer in Paris in 1972 noted, "Mademoiselle Dietrich's voice remains perfect, but the aroma emanating from the stage is decidedly imperfect." The most shocking revelation came from her longtime companion, Burt Bacharach, who toured with her as her musical director. In his 2013 memoir, he wrote, "After performances, Marlene would be drenched in sweat. She'd go back to her hotel, spray on more perfume, and sleep in the same costume. The next night, she'd perform in it again. I tried to suggest she might want fresh clothing. She told me Europeans didn't waste clothes the way Americans did. I didn't know what to say." Her smell became part of her legend, whispered about but never openly discussed. Kenneth Tynan, the British theater critic, wrote in his personal journal, "Dietrich is a goddess to be admired from afar. Approach too closely and the illusion shatters, not from seeing the makeup or the artifice, but from encountering the olfactory reality." By the 1970s, Dietrich had become increasingly reclusive. She rarely left her Paris apartment. When she did, she was shrouded in scarves and veils, as much to contain her scent as to preserve her mystery. When she died in 1992 at age 90, her apartment was open for the first time in years. One of the cleaners later told a French newspaper, "The smell, it was embedded in everything. The walls, the furniture, the carpets. We had to air the place for weeks. Some items couldn't be salvaged. They had to be destroyed." Her final instructions included a note that her performance costumes should be sealed in airtight containers before being donated to museums. The museums thought it was to preserve the delicate fabrics. Only those who'd known her understood the real reason. But if Dietrich's scent was European sophistication gone wrong, our next star's aroma was pure American excess, bourbon, tobacco, and the smell of old Hollywood literally dying on the vine. John Wayne was America. Stagecoach, the Searchers' true grit, he was cowboys and soldiers, pioneers and heroes, the man who won the West on screen 100 times. But on Western sets across California, Nevada, and Arizona, John Wayne was also the man who made grown men gag. August 1969, Monument Valley, Arizona. True Grit was in production, and Wayne, at age 62, was giving the performance that would finally win him an Oscar. He was also giving everyone on set a performance they'd never forget. Wayne had developed what he called his working man's hygiene routine. According to his longtime stunt double, Chuck Roberson, who revealed the truth in his 1999 memoir, Duke believed that cowboys didn't bathe. He was playing Rooster Cogburn, a hard-drinking, one-eyed marshal who lived in the saddle. So Duke decided he shouldn't bathe either. For 6 weeks of filming, John Wayne showered once a week. But it gets worse. Wayne's costume for the film included a leather vest, thick wool shirt, heavy cotton pants, and the same black eye patch worn every single day. Music. In the Arizona desert, temperatures reached 110 degrees. Wayne would sweat through his costume completely within 2 hours of filming. But he refused to change. The character wouldn't change clothes. Wayne insisted to director Henry Hathaway. "So I ain't changing clothes." Kim Darby, who was only 21 years old and playing Maddie Ross, later told Entertainment Weekly, "The first scene we shot together, Duke rode up on his horse and leaned down to talk to me. I thought I was going to faint. It was like standing downwind from a stable that hadn't been cleaned in a month, mixed with whiskey and cigars. I was supposed to look up at him adoringly. I was actually trying not to vomit." Glenn Campbell, making his film debut, fared no better. Campbell told Johnny Carson in 1971, "John Wayne is a legend and an American hero. But Lord have mercy, that man smelled like he'd been dead for 3 days and someone tried to preserve him with bourbon." The scenes in the small cabin were particularly brutal. The cabin set was built on a soundstage with no windows, sealed tight for sound and lighting. Music. Wayne, Darby, and Campbell were supposed to spend hours in this enclosed space, delivering their lines, building chemistry. Assistant director Paul Helmick documented what happened. "We sealed the set at 9 a.m. By 9:30, Miss Darby had requested a fan. By 10 o'clock, Mr. Campbell had requested multiple fans. By 10:30, both actors had requested a break and practically ran outside. When Henry Hathaway asked what was wrong, they both just pointed at Duke. But Wayne didn't care. In fact, he seemed proud of it. Hathaway confronted him during lunch. "Duke, you've got to clean up. The kids can't work with you like this." Wayne's response, according to Hathaway's biographer, "Henry, Rooster Cogburn wouldn't smell like roses. If those kids can't handle a little authentic Western aroma, maybe they shouldn't be making Westerns." The breaking point came during the famous courthouse scene. Wayne had to sit in a witness box for 8 hours of filming. The judge, the lawyers, the jury members, all played by character actors who'd worked in Hollywood for decades, were sealed in a soundstage courtroom with him. By hour 3, 2 extras had requested to be released from the scene. By hour 5, the actor playing the judge, John Fiedler, developed a migraine so severe he had to be replaced. The replacement judge, Edgar Buchanan, pulled Hathaway aside. "Henry, I've worked cattle drives. I've lived in bunkhouses with 30 men who hadn't bathed in months. But this is something else." What made Wayne smell particularly lethal was the combination. He drank a fifth of bourbon a day, starting at breakfast. He smoked 4 packs of cigarettes daily. He chewed tobacco on set. He refused to clean his eye patch, which accumulated sweat, tobacco juice, and grime day after day. And he was dying. Wayne had secretly been battling cancer since 1964. He'd had a lung removed. The disease was changing his body chemistry, creating odors he couldn't control even if he wanted to. But he didn't want to. Wayne saw his smell as part of his authenticity. He was the Duke. He was the last real man in Hollywood. He didn't need to smell pretty for anybody. The costume department finally took matters into their own hands. Costume designer Marjorie Phelps told American Film, "We started making duplicate costumes. While Duke was in his trailer between setups, we'd swap out his soiled costume for a fresh one. He never noticed. Or if he did, he never said anything." The Academy Awards ceremony in April 1970 provided one final notorious incident. Wayne won the Oscar for Best Actor. When Barbra Streisand handed him the statuette, cameras caught her subtly turning her head and taking a shallow breath. Streisand later told friends, according to her biographer James Spada, "I was so happy for him, truly. But up close, I could smell everything. The booze sweating out of him, the tobacco, the unwashed clothes. I handed him the Oscar and stepped back as quickly as I could without being obvious." John Wayne died in 1979. His obituaries celebrated his 50-year career, his 170 films, his status as an American icon. They didn't mention that nurses at UCLA Medical Center during his final days had noted in his charts, patient resistant to basic hygiene protocols, refuses regular bathing despite medical necessity. Even dying, the Duke insisted on doing things his way. The question Hollywood insiders still debate: Was Wayne's smell authentic commitment to his craft, or was it the stubbornness of a man who confused bad hygiene with masculinity? 8 Hollywood legends. 8 unforgettable scents. These stories remind us that icons were human, flawed, stubborn, sometimes sick, always real. So here's my question. Does knowing the truth change how you see these classic films? What does the magic win? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. This has been Hollywood Memory Vault. Sometimes the truth smells worse than fiction.